No, that's not possible. Marcus Hale's voice didn't rise above a whisper, but in a courtroom that quiet, everyone heard it anyway. For 2 days, his attorney had built a careful, expensive picture of me. Captain Grace Sullivan, wounded veteran, unstable, medicated, physically limited, emotionally compromised. A woman who loved her son, sure, but who couldn't possibly give him what he needed. Not the way Marcus could. Not the way his new house in a gated community could. Not the way his new wife, sitting behind him in a cream-colored blazer with her arms folded, could. Judge Patricia Ward opened a thick folder on the bench in front of her. She adjusted her glasses. She read one paragraph. Just one. And I watched the color drain out of my ex-husband's face like someone had pulled a plug. No, he said again, quieter this time. That's not possible. The judge looked up over the rim of her glasses. It appears, she said, in a voice that had clearly delivered 1,000 rulings and would deliver 1,000 more, that this court has been given an incomplete picture of Captain Sullivan. I sat very still at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded on top of a single worn leather folder. 9 years of my life were inside that folder, 9 years Marcus hadn't bothered to ask about. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked afraid. Not of me, of the truth. The strange thing was, I had never hidden any of it. He had simply never cared enough to ask. 11 months before that IED changed the shape of my life, I was standing in a hospital room in Fayetteville, North Carolina, holding a 6-pound, 2-ounce boy who would not stop crying. And I remember thinking that I had never been more terrified or more certain of anything. "He's got your stubborn chin," Marcus said, grinning down at him. "He's got your lungs," I said, and Marcus laughed, and for a moment we were just two exhausted, happy people looking at the thing they'd made together. We named him Eli. I took 12 weeks of convalescent leave which the Army owed me and which I used every single day of learning how to nurse a colicky baby at 3 in the morning while Marcus slept through it. Learning the particular exhaustion of new motherhood that nobody warns you feels like a low-grade fever that never breaks. I went back to my unit when Eli was 5 months old. That's normal. That's what most of my friends in uniform did. I was a logistics officer, a captain, good at my job, and my job mostly kept me on base coordinating supply lines, running briefings. Home every night by 6 to bathe my son and read him the same board book 14 times because he liked the sound of my voice more than the words. 6 months after that, my unit got word that a humanitarian convoy escort out of our sister battalion needed an experienced logistics officer. Captain Delgado, who was supposed to go, had a ruptured appendix 2 days before deployment. I wasn't next in line. I wasn't even on the list. But I knew the route. I knew the terrain briefings, and I knew that if I said no, they'd send someone less prepared into a convoy that was already running behind schedule. I told Marcus at the kitchen table, Eli asleep in the next room. "You don't have to go," he said. "You have a waiver. New mothers can decline." "I know I have a waiver." "Then use it." "Marcus, if I don't go, they send Lieutenant Ferris. He's got maybe a third of the convoy experience I do." "I don't care about Lieutenant Ferris. I care about you not coming home in a box and leaving me alone with a baby." "I'll be back in 6 weeks," I said. "I need you to understand this isn't me choosing something over you and Eli. It's me making sure I come home to you and Eli, and so does everyone else on that convoy." He didn't understand. Or EIT, already, well I cape that. Amwani mean other sao, welften tu I kai. Well, Amini finally did. It wasn't kind. "If you go," he said, standing in the doorway with his jacket already on for work, "don't expect me to just wait around like some perfect little wife with a candle in the window. I'm not built for that." I didn't know then exactly what that sentence meant. I would find out. The convoy was a humanitarian escort, moving medical supplies and 2 civilian aid workers through a corridor that had been quiet for months. Quiet until it wasn't. An improvised explosive device tore through the second vehicle in our line. I remember the heat before I remember the sound. I remember pulling 2 young soldiers out of a burning Humvee, my hands blistering through my gloves, before a secondary device went off and threw me almost 15 feet across broken asphalt, shattered pelvis, 4 broken ribs, severe ligament damage in my left knee. The doctors at the field hospital told me later that I was lucky to be alive, and luckier still to eventually walk. Eventually. That word would follow me around for the next 2 years like a shadow. I flew into Pope Army Airfield on a gray October afternoon, and I don't remember much of the landing. Painkillers blur things. I remember the smell of antiseptic. I remember the weight of the brace on my left leg. I remember thinking absurdly how green North Carolina looked after months of dust-colored everything. Mostly I remember thinking I was finally going home to my husband and my son. Eli was 14 months old. He didn't recognize me at first. That hurt worse than the ribs. Marcus met me at the hospital with flowers. I think now that he bought them because it was expected of him, not because he wanted to. He smiled for the 2 photographs a public affairs officer took for the base newsletter. He held my hand while a nurse changed my dressing. He kissed my forehead. I thought I was lucky. I had no idea he had already made up his mind. 2 days after I was transferred to a recovery facility closer to home, he came into my room carrying a manila envelope. He didn't sit down. He didn't ask how physical therapy was going. He didn't ask if I needed anything. He set the envelope on the blanket over my legs. I already signed everything, he said. I frowned. What is this? The divorce papers. For one absurd second, I thought the medication was playing tricks on me. What? I can't do this anymore, Grace. I'm still in the hospital, Marcus. I know. I can't even stand up on my own. I know that too. He looked away from me, toward the window. I didn't marry someone I'd have to spend the rest of my life taking care of. The room went unbearably quiet. I searched his face for even a flicker of guilt and found nothing there. What about Eli? I'll send child support. You haven't held him in a week, Marcus. He'll be better off without all of this. He gestured, vaguely, at the wheelchair folded in the corner, at the brace on my leg, at me. I have spent years wondering whether he ever regretted saying those words. I know now that he meant every one of them. 3 days after my discharge from the recovery facility, my brother Jake drove me home. Marcus wasn't there. His closet was empty. Half the furniture was gone. So were the framed photographs that used to line our hallway. The only thing waiting for me on the kitchen counter was a folder from his attorney. That afternoon, my neighbor Carol walked across the street holding a casserole dish, hesitating on my porch steps before she spoke. I wasn't sure if anyone had told you, she said. Told me what? I saw Marcus yesterday. He was moving into that new condo development downtown. My stomach tightened. He wasn't alone. I already knew. Somehow, I already knew. A week later, another army wife I barely knew forwarded me a photo she'd accidentally taken at a restaurant downtown. Marcus, laughing, holding hands with a woman from his office. The timestamp was from 3 weeks before my deployment even started. It hadn't started after my injuries. It had simply become easier for him to stop pretending once I wasn't around to notice. Every morning started the same way after that. Pain medication. Physical therapy, twice a week in Fayetteville. Learning how to transfer myself from bed to wheelchair without dropping my son, who was walking now, unsteady and delighted with himself, oblivious to how carefully I had to plan every single movement of my body around keeping him safe. My VA therapist, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Amechi, asked me once what frightened me most. I surprised myself with the answer, that my son grows up believing his father left because of me. Dr. Amechi looked at me for a long moment. Children don't remember who walked away, he said finally. They remember who stayed. That sentence carried me through more nights than I can count. Some evenings I slept sitting upright in a recliner because lying flat pulled too hard at my ribs. Other nights Eli cried for hours with a fever while I shuffled down the hallway on a walker, praying my knee wouldn't buckle before he finally settled. There were nights I wondered if Marcus had been right about me. Then Eli would wrap his whole fist around one of my fingers and I would find another reason to stand up, literally. I had survived a battlefield. Now I had another war to win, and this one didn't come with an exit strategy. It came with school lunches and fevers and a little boy who needed to believe without a single doubt that someone would always fight for him. Healing wasn't measured in months. It was measured in small, unwitnessed victories. The first time I stood without someone catching me, the first time I crossed the living room on a cane instead of a walker, the first morning I lifted Eli out of his crib without gasping from the pain in my ribs. Nobody applauded those moments. Nobody pinned a medal on my chest for them. But they were victories all the same. Cold mornings reminded me of every fracture I'd ever had. Rain made my knee ache like an old grudge that refused to be settled. Still, I walked. Every weekday started before sunrise because Eli usually woke around 5:30, cheerful and demanding long before I felt ready to face another day of it. I'd ease myself out of bed, gripping the nightstand until my left leg felt steady enough to trust, and then go get him, because that's what the day required, whether or not my body had voted on the matter. There was a particular Tuesday about a year into all of it when my knee simply gave out, halfway across the living room, no warning, no reason, just gone. And I went down hard onto the carpet with Eli 2 feet away in his high chair, watching me with wide, uncertain eyes. I remember lying there for a moment, cataloging the pain the way I'd been trained to catalog injuries in the field, and then I remember laughing. Not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I was fairly sure I'd never get back up. "Mom is okay, bud," I said, still on the floor, still laughing a little, tears mixing in without my permission. "Mom is okay." He wasn't convinced. He cried until I managed to pull myself up using the coffee table, and then he reached his small arms toward me and I held him, even though every part of my body screamed against it, because some things aren't optional, no matter what they cost. My brother Jake stopped by most mornings before his shift at the electrical co-op, coffee in hand, checking on us in a way that never once made me feel like a burden. "You good?" he'd ask, every single day. "I'm good. You sure?" "No," I'd say, and he'd laugh, kiss Eli on the top of his head, tighten a loose cabinet hinge or replace a light bulb, and leave without making a thing of it. My parents were 2,000 miles away in Arizona, but they called every evening. My mother sent care packages full of things Eli didn't need and I didn't ask for and loved anyway. My father read him bedtime stories over video calls until Eli learned to recognize his grandfather's voice through a phone screen before he could form full sentences. After 18 months of rehabilitation, I was medically retired from active duty. Handing over my active duty ID was harder than I expected. The Army had been the shape of my identity since I was 22 years old. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot afterward, engine off, trying to figure out who Grace Sullivan was without a uniform. Meanwhile, my disability claim with the VA sat in a queue somewhere, untouched, for the better part of 2 years. I called every few months. I got a case number. I got a form letter. I did not get an answer. My retirement pension covered the basics and not much else, and I sold my SUV for a used sedan with 110,000 miles on it and told myself it still ran fine, which it did, mostly. I wasn't destitute. I want to be clear about that. I was tired. There's a difference, and anyone who's fought a federal bureaucracy while raising a toddler alone knows exactly what I mean. My old commanding officer, Colonel Rachel Foster, refused to let me disappear into that particular kind of quiet. "I hear you've been sitting at home too long," she said over the phone one afternoon. "I have a 2-year-old, ma'am." So does half the Pentagon. She offered me a civilian logistics position with a defense contractor in Raleigh. No deployments, no command, no rank insignia. Just 20 years of experience put to use, and evenings home with my son. I took it. The first few months at the contractor job were an adjustment I hadn't fully prepared for. I traded a uniform for a badge on a lanyard, briefings for spreadsheets, and command presence for polite conference room small talk with men who had never once had to learn how to transfer themselves from a wheelchair into a car seat. Nobody there knew what I'd survived unless I told them, and mostly I didn't. It was strange, being ordinary in a room. Strange, and after a while, something close to restful. Money was still tight in those years, in a way that never quite showed from the outside. Our townhouse wasn't fancy. The carpet had seen better days by the time we moved in secondhand, and the kitchen cabinet stuck if you didn't lift it just right on the way open. But it was ours, and after everything I'd been through, ours and quiet felt like considerably more than I'd expected to get to keep. It was at the VA clinic, during one of my endless physical therapy appointments, that I met Ryan Doyle. He was one of the physical therapists there, a former Army firefighter who'd left the service with a bad shoulder and a habit of talking to patients like they were people instead of case files. "You're overcorrecting on the left side," he told me the first week, watching me limp through a set of exercises. "You're so used to protecting that knee you're throwing off everything else. Your hip's going to start screaming at you in about 5 years if we don't fix it now." "Duly noted," I said. He didn't flirt with me. He didn't treat me like a tragedy. He just showed up week after week, correcting my form, occasionally bringing an extra coffee because he'd noticed I always forgot to eat breakfast before early appointments. It took almost 2 years before I let myself notice that I looked forward to Tuesdays. There was nothing dramatic about it. He didn't make speeches. He remembered small things instead, that I took my coffee black, that my knee ached worse on rainy weeks before I'd even mention it, that I hated being asked how I was doing in that careful, pitying tone people sometimes used when they found out I was a veteran, a single mother, and disabled all in the same sentence. Ryan never asked me how I was doing that way. He'd just say, "Rough week?" Like it was a normal thing one person asks another, and somehow that made it easier to answer honestly. He never pushed, never once asked for more than I offered. When Eli came to a few of my appointments because daycare had a scheduling conflict, Ryan knelt down to his level and asked him serious questions about dinosaurs, like Eli's opinion on the Stegosaurus's tail spikes actually mattered to him. It did, I think. That was the thing about Ryan. Things mattered to him quietly, consistently, without any need to announce it. Marcus faithfully paid the child support the court had ordered. Nothing more. No birthday cards, no Christmas visits, no phone calls. Sometimes months passed without Eli even mentioning his father's name. When Eli was old enough to ask the hard questions, I promised myself I would never poison his heart, no matter how much of my own had been broken doing the not poisoning. One evening after his kindergarten graduation, he climbed onto the couch next to me, still wearing his little paper cap. "Mom? Yeah, buddy. Why doesn't my dad come see me?" Children ask impossible questions with terrifying simplicity. I turned off the television. "Your dad made some different choices," I said. "Did he not love me?" That question hit harder than any explosion I'd survived overseas. I pulled him into my lap. "Listen to me. There is nothing wrong with you. Not one single thing. Then why? Sometimes grown-ups make selfish choices, and it isn't about the people they leave behind. It's about something broken in them. Is he a bad man?" I thought about that carefully before I answered, because I meant to keep my promise. "No," I said. "He made bad choices. That's different." I hoped someday Eli would understand the difference. I wasn't sure I fully understood it myself. Years moved the way years do when you're not looking directly at them. Eli grew into the kind of boy teachers wrote notes home about, not for trouble, but for kindness. He held doors for strangers. He thanked the cafeteria workers by name. He helped Mrs. Alvarez next door carry her groceries up the steps without being asked every single Tuesday, because that was trash day and she was slow on the stairs. Every Veterans Day, he insisted on laying flowers at the small memorial downtown. Nobody told him to. He devoured books about military history, watched documentaries with his grandfather over video calls, memorized the names of Medal of Honor recipients the way other 9-year-olds memorize batting averages. One Saturday morning, over cereal, he looked at me with the particular seriousness only children can manage before 10 a.m. "Mom, were you scared?" "Where?" "When you were deployed." I smiled. "Every single day." His eyes went wide. "Really? Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Eli. It means doing the right thing anyway." He nodded slowly, and I could almost watch the idea settling into some permanent room in his chest. Meanwhile, from what little I heard through the grapevine, life looked shinier for Marcus than it had any right to. Expensive dinners. A lake house. Photos of Ashley, the woman from the restaurant photo, now his wife, in matching vacation outfits. From the outside, he had everything he'd apparently wanted instead of us. I stopped paying attention to any of it. Until one afternoon in April, everything changed. Eli's fourth-grade teacher, Mrs. Wynne, pulled me aside after an award ceremony. "Mrs. Sullivan, I wanted you to know. Eli's been nominated." "For what?" "The Carolina Junior Leadership Academy." She smiled. "It's an extremely selective program. Leadership training, academic mentorship, a scholarship track. They take maybe 20 students statewide each year." I had never heard of it. That night I researched it until midnight and found myself grinning at my laptop like a lunatic. Eli worked on his application for 6 weeks straight, revising his essay at the kitchen table every evening, and when the acceptance letter finally arrived, he came through the front door waving it over his head before he'd even gotten his backpack off. "I got in! Mom, I got in!" I hugged him so tight, he laughed and told me to let go. He couldn't breathe, and I laughed too, because for one uncomplicated evening, everything was exactly as good as it looked. Neither of us knew someone else had been paying attention. 3 weeks later, a certified envelope arrived from a downtown law office. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter, and the first line made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "Petition for Saw legal and physical custody. Not visitation. Not shared parenting. Full custody. My son, I must have read that first page 10 times before the words rearranged themselves into something my brain could accept. I stood there while the kettle screamed on the stove behind me until I finally remembered to turn it off. Ellie came in from school, backpack still on. "Mom, you okay?" I folded the papers quickly. "Just some work stuff, bud." He nodded and disappeared up the stairs. I waited until I heard his bedroom door click shut before I let myself cry, standing alone in my kitchen, not because I was afraid of losing, though God I was, but because after 9 years of silence, Marcus had decided he suddenly deserved to be called a father. Denise Coleman's office overlooked downtown Raleigh, shelves crowded with legal binders and one framed photo of her own daughter in a graduation gown. She'd served 8 years in the Judge Advocate General's Corps before going into private family law, and another veteran had given me her name like it was a lifeline. She read the petition without saying a word. When she finally looked up, she exhaled slowly. "This isn't really about custody," she said. I figured. He waited almost a decade. He barely used the visitation rights he already had. She tapped one paragraph with her pen. "Here's their actual argument. Combat injuries have left you with, quote, ongoing physical limitations and unresolved emotional instability." That's not new. That's the same thing his lawyer tried 9 years ago. There's more. Denise turned the page and her expression changed. "They've attached a private investigator's report alleging a pattern of opioid dependency." The air went out of the room. "That's a lie," I said. "I haven't taken a prescription painkiller in 6 years. I have every VA medical record to prove it." "I believe you," Denise said, "but someone paid a private investigator good money to build this case, which tells me Marcus isn't doing this on a whim. This is calculated. Why now? Why after 9 years of nothing?" Denise was quiet for a moment. "We're going to find out." We spent the next several weeks assembling 9 years of proof that a life had actually been lived. Employment records, school attendance, every medical evaluation the BA had ever requested, letters from Eli's teachers' volunteer certificates, a stack of report cards that told the same story on every page. Stable home. Healthy, thriving child. Present, engaged mother. My brother Jake showed up one Saturday afternoon with 2 coffees and an unusually serious look on his face. "I think I know what's going on," he said. "What?" "Ran into an old coworker of mine who does IT contracting for Marcus's brokerage." Jake sat down across from me. "Apparently Marcus has been bragging around the office about his son getting into some elite leadership academy, telling people the kid's headed for a military academy recommendation, scholarships, the whole thing." I frowned. He's never once congratulated Eli directly. According to my buddy, he's been telling clients his son is, quote, on track for great things, like it's part of his own resume. Jake shook his head. "He doesn't want to raise his son, Grace. He wants to claim him, show him off, rewrite the whole story." A week later, Jake's coworker's wife, a woman named Wanda who used to work reception at Marcus's brokerage, agreed to meet me at a diner off the highway. She looked nervous the whole time, stirring her coffee long after it had gone cold. "I probably shouldn't be telling you any of this," she said, "but it didn't sit right with me, watching it happen. I appreciate you coming." Marcus had me pull together a folder a few months back. Photos from the boys' school website, some article about the leadership program, that kind of thing. Said he wanted it for his personal files. Wanda shook her head. "Man hadn't asked about that kid in years, as far as I ever heard." Then, suddenly, he's got a folder and a lawyer, and he's telling clients about his gifted son like he tucked him in every night himself. Did he ever mention why now, specifically? Only once. Overheard him on the phone. Said something like, "Colleges care about family involvement, Todd. We need this to look right before the applications go out." She finally looked up at me. "I'm sorry. I know that's an awful thing to hear." It wasn't awful so much as it was clarifying. Marcus wasn't trying to become a father. He was trying to become a character in Eli's college application essay. It should have hurt more than it did. Mostly it just confirmed something I'd already known in my bones. He hadn't changed. He'd just found a new reason to want what he'd thrown away. Denise filed a motion challenging the private investigator's report and requested every piece of supporting documentation, which turned out to be almost nothing. No lab results, no dates, no named sources. Just a vague narrative built to sound worse than it could survive scrutiny. She also filed something else quietly weeks before the trial date, a formal request to the Department of Defense for my complete unredacted service record, including a classified annex from my final deployment that had never been fully declassified for civilian proceedings. It'll take time, she warned me. These requests move slower than a Monday morning DMV line. If it comes through before trial, good. If not, we work with what we have, and if it doesn't come through at all, then we win on 9 years of paperwork instead of one dramatic document, Denise said. I prefer the paperwork win anyway, honestly. Judges trust boring far more than they trust dramatic. Dramatic makes them suspicious. Boring? Consistent, 9 years of the same story makes them comfortable. She closed her folder. You've given me an enormous amount of boring, Grace. That's the best possible thing you could have handed me. It was, strangely, the first time in weeks I'd laughed at anything related to the case. What's in the classified annex? Denise looked at me carefully. You tell me. I hadn't thought about that part of the deployment in years. I'd buried it the way you bury the things that are too heavy to carry around every day. It's not about my injuries, I said slowly. It's about the extraction. The convoy wasn't just hauling medical supplies. There were 2 State Department liaisons in that group, diplomatic personnel. That's why parts of the after-action report got sealed, not because of anything I did wrong, but because of who I was protecting. Denise nodded like this confirmed something. Then let's hope it gets here in time. The deposition happened on a Tuesday morning in a glass-walled conference room that smelled like burnt coffee. Marcus's attorney, a sharp-suited man named Todd Grant, asked his questions with the practiced calm of someone who'd done this 100 times. Captain Sullivan, do loud noises still startle you? Sometimes. Do you experience nightmares related to your service? Occasionally. So you'd agree your combat experience continues to affect your daily functioning? They affect my memories, Mr. Cad. Grant, isn't that the same thing? No, I said. I remember my deployment. I remember the friends I lost. I remember the exact sound an IED makes when it's 15 feet away from your body. But I have never once neglected my son, not for a single day of his life. He shifted tactics. You still walk with a limp. I do. Could you run if your son were in danger? No. So if he needed you to move quickly, my body would hurt afterward, I said, holding his gaze. But I would still get to him first, every time. He didn't ask another question for almost a full minute. Outside the conference room, Denise squeezed my shoulder. You handled that beautifully, she said. I've testified in front of military review boards, Denise. This wasn't my first hard room. Still, something about the whole shape of the case bothered me the entire drive home. Marcus wasn't behaving like a father desperate to reconnect. He was behaving like a man closing a business deal. That night, after Eli was asleep, Ryan came by with takeout neither of us really touched. I told him about the deposition, about the opioid allegation, about the strange, cold feeling of watching a stranger try to rebuild your life into something unrecognizable, using nothing but implication. You know none of it's true, Ryan said. You know that better than anyone in that room ever could. Knowing it and having a judge believe it are 2 different things. You spent 9 years proving who you are through actions nobody was even watching, he said. I don't think that stops mattering just because someone finally is watching. I didn't have a response for that. I just sat with it, and with him in a kitchen that had slowly, carefully become the safest room I knew. I'm scared, Ryan, I admitted quietly, the way I hadn't let myself admit to almost anyone else in the entire process. Not of losing an argument, of losing him. I know, he said. For what it's worth, I don't think that's happening, but I understand why the fear doesn't care what I think. He didn't try to fix it further than that. He just stayed until I was ready for him to leave, which on that particular night was considerably later than usual. The trial began on a cold morning in early spring. The Wake County Courthouse felt sterile in a way my military hearings never had. Those had been my career. This was my child. Marcus arrived in a tailored navy suit, his hair freshly cut, his watch expensive enough to catch the light every time he moved his wrist. Ashley sat behind him in the gallery, pearls at her throat, her expression carefully arranged into something like concern. They looked together like a magazine advertisement for a life I'd never had the money or the inclination to want. I arrived with one worn leather folder, 9 years of ordinary, unglamorous truth. Judge Patricia Ward entered precisely at 9 o'clock, reviewed the case file for several minutes without speaking, and then folded her hands. Before this court hears a single argument, she said, I want both parties to understand the lens through which I will be evaluating this case. Custody is not a reward for biology. It is not a reward for financial success. This court's only question, in every case like this one, is simple. Over the years in question, who was actually present in this child's life? Who showed up consistently when it was inconvenient, exhausting, and unglamorous to do so? Everything else is secondary. I watched Marcus's confident posture falter, just slightly at the word present. Todd Grant spoke first, for nearly an hour, painting a picture of a wounded, unstable veteran and a stable, successful father finally ready to step into his rightful role. He referenced the investigator's report obliquely, careful never to state its claims outright without evidence to back them. But the implication hung in the room anyway. When it was Denise's turn, she didn't attack Marcus directly. She simply built, brick by brick, 9 years of documented reality, employment records, VA medical evaluations, clean, consistent, thoroughly documented, school records, volunteer certificates, a dozen witnesses who each described the same woman, dependable, patient, disciplined, present. Then she addressed the investigator's report head-on. Your Honor, opposing counsel has referenced allegations of substance dependency. I'd like to enter into evidence 6 years of consecutive VA toxicology screenings, all negative, along with a signed statement from Captain Sullivan's treating physician confirming she has not been prescribed opioid medication since her final surgery 6 years ago. Todd Grant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I would also like the court to note, Denise continued, that the investigator who authored this report has, on 2 prior occasions, been reprimanded by the state licensing board for fabricating surveillance logs in unrelated custody disputes. A murmur moved through the gallery. Judge Ward held up one hand for silence, but her eyes had narrowed toward the plaintiff's table. Mr. Grant, she said, did you vet this investigator's credentials before submitting his report to this court? Your Honor, that's a yes or no question. Me. No, Your Honor. Interesting, the judge said in a tone that made the words sound like a verdict all on its own. Mrs. Nguyen, Eli's 4th-grade teacher, testified next, her hands folded neatly in her lap on the witness stand. In my 9 years of teaching, she said, Captain Sullivan is one of the most consistently present parents I've worked with. She's attended every conference, every award ceremony, every fundraiser, often writing straight from work, cane in hand, without ever once making it about her own difficulties. Eli talks about his mother's service with enormous pride. He has never once, in my presence, mentioned his father. Todd Grant rose for cross-examination. Mrs. Nguyen, are you aware that Mr. Hale has expressed a desire to become more involved in his son's education? I'm aware he's expressed that recently. Yes, she said carefully. I've never received a call, an email, or met him in person prior to this month. Denise let the silence after that answer sit for a long moment before calling her next witness. Then Marcus took the stand. I've always loved my son, he said, with the easy confidence of a man used to being believed. Denise stood, unhurried. When was the last birthday party you attended? Silence. When was the last parent-teacher conference? Silence. What is Eli's favorite subject in school? Marcus hesitated. Science. It's history, Denise said. What size shoes does your son wear? No answer. What is he allergic to? Marcus looked toward his attorney, as if Todd Grant could somehow answer for him. I don't remember, he finally admitted. Denise thanked him and returned to her seat. Judge Ward's expression didn't change, but something in the room had shifted, the way a room shifts right before a storm breaks. Your Honor, Denise said, rising again, I'd like to formally submit a supplemental exhibit that arrived from the Department of Defense this morning, following a subpoena filed 6 weeks ago. Judge Ward's eyebrows rose slightly. Proceed. The clerk carried forward a thin, official folder, its cover stamped with a seal that had clearly been broken and resealed for court delivery. Judge Ward broke the new seal without ceremony, the quiet confidence of someone who understood that facts carry more weight than performance. She read in silence. Service history, deployments, commendations, and then, halfway through, she stopped. Her eyes rested on one paragraph for what felt like a very long time. She read it again. Captain Sullivan, she said. Yes, Your Honor. This annex was previously withheld from civilian proceedings due to its connection to a diplomatic security matter. It has since been declassified for the purposes of this hearing. Is that your understanding? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. She nodded once, adjusted her glasses, and looked out at the courtroom. I'm going to read this into the record. Every person in that room seemed to lean forward at exactly the same moment. Despite sustaining multiple life-threatening injuries during a hostile engagement, Captain Grace Sullivan refused medical evacuation until all personnel under her protection, including 2 Department of State liaisons, had been safely extracted from the area. Subsequent psychological evaluation found her decision-making under extreme duress to be exemplary and her judgment, emotional stability, and command presence to be, in the evaluator's words, quote, among the finest this reviewer has observed in 20 years of service, end quote. Silence. Absolute silence. I closed my eyes for a brief second. I hadn't heard those words read aloud since the day they were written. When I opened them again, Marcus had gone completely pale, his mouth slightly open. "No," he whispered. His eyes never left me. That's not possible." Judge Ward looked directly at him. "Mr. Hale." He didn't answer. Behind him, in the gallery, I saw Ashley shift in her seat, glancing toward the exit as though she were already, quietly, calculating a way out of the life she built next to him. "I assume your attorney reviewed this document before today's proceedings." Todd Grant flipped through his own copy, his expression shifting with every page. He reached the same paragraph, turned another page, then another. Finally, he closed the folder slowly, not slammed, not dropped, simply closed, and removed his glasses to rub his forehead. That small, quiet gesture said more than any objection could have. Denise leaned toward me and whispered, "I think their case just collapsed." But the hearing wasn't finished. "Mr. Hale," Judge Ward said, folding her hands, "you have repeatedly argued, both directly and through counsel, that Captain Sullivan's military injuries render her incapable of sound parental judgment." "Yes, Your Honor." Yet the official evaluation conducted by the United States Army concludes precisely the opposite. And this court has, in addition, 9 years of consistent, unbroken evidence of stable, attentive parenting on her part. She turned a page. Perfect attendance at parent-teacher conferences. Another page. Volunteer hours lauded at her son's school every semester for 9 years. Another. I find no evidence anywhere in this record that Captain Sullivan has ever placed anything above her son's well-being. She looked directly at Marcus now. "I do, however, find substantial evidence that you voluntarily removed yourself from your son's life for nearly a decade, and that this petition was filed only after your son achieved a level of academic distinction you found personally attractive." Todd Grant rose halfway. "Your Honor." She raised one hand without even looking at him. "I'm not finished." He sat back down. Judge Ward then addressed the court advocate seated near the bench. "I understand Eli has been made available for an in-camera interview, per standard protocol, with the court-appointed child advocate present." "Yes, Your Honor," the advocate confirmed. "He's ready whenever the court is." Eli was brought in through a side door, small in a room built for adults, holding the hand of the advocate assigned to represent his interests. He wasn't crying. He looked mostly confused, the way children look when they've been told something is very important, but not exactly why. The interview happened privately, away from the gallery, away from both his parents. It lasted 11 minutes. When Judge Ward returned to the bench afterward, she took a moment before speaking, folding her hands the way she had all morning. "I asked Eli several questions," she said, addressing the full courtroom. "I asked him whether he loved his mother. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, more than anybody in the whole world. I asked whether she takes good care of him. He said, every single day, even on days her leg hurts really bad. I asked what he wanted this court to know." She paused, and for the first time all day, her composed voice caught, just slightly. "He told me that last year he broke his arm playing baseball, and his mother carried him into the emergency room even though her own leg was hurting that day too. He said, and again, I'm quoting him precisely, 'She always says soldiers don't leave people behind, and she never left me behind either.'" I felt the tears before I understood I was crying. Not from embarrassment, because every difficult night, every silent scream of pain during physical therapy, every lonely birthday I'd spent making sure his was perfect anyway, had somehow arrived, all at once, at this exact moment. Judge Ward removed her glasses entirely and set them on the bench. "There is a significant difference," she said, looking now at Marcus, "between becoming interested in a child and becoming a parent. One requires nothing but timing. The other requires years. Marcus lowered his head. For the first time since I'd known him, he had absolutely nothing to say. The judge was quiet for a long moment before delivering her ruling. No one in the courtroom moved. Even the fluorescent lights overhead seemed loud in the silence. This court recognizes the general importance of a child having both parents present in his life, she began. Marcus straightened slightly. For one brief second, hope flickered across his face. But parenthood, she continued, is measured by consistent love, sacrifice, responsibility, and presence. Not biology alone, and certainly not by re-entering a child's life, only once that child has become, in your words to colleagues, on track for great things. She looked toward me. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Captain Grace Sullivan has provided her son with a stable, loving, and secure home, despite extraordinary physical and financial hardship. Her military service and subsequent injuries have not diminished her capacity to parent. If anything, the record suggests they deepened her commitment to her son beyond what most parents are ever tested to prove. I lowered my eyes, fighting the second wave of tears. 9 years. Every fever at 2 a.m. Every school project glued together at the kitchen table. Every birthday, every Christmas morning, every hard conversation I'd had to have alone. Someone had finally seen all of it out loud, in a room full of strangers. This court also finds, Judge Ward continued, turning to Marcus, that you voluntarily removed yourself from your son's daily life for nearly a decade, and that this petition filed shortly after his acceptance into a prestigious academic program raises serious questions about motive that this court is unable to ignore. Additionally, the submission of an unverified and professionally discredited investigator's report reflects poorly on the good faith of this petition. She closed the folder in front of her. The petition for sole custody is denied. Marcus closed his eyes. The judge wasn't finished. However, she said, I believe children generally benefit from healthy relationships with both parents. When such relationships can be built in good faith, if you sincerely wish to become part of Eli's life, Mr. Hale, that door remains open. His eyes lifted, but it will not begin with custody. It will begin with trust. She ordered a gradual, supervised visitation schedule through a licensed family counselor, with every step contingent on Eli's comfort and no disruption to his current home or routine. This court will not reward absence with authority. It will, however, allow for the possibility of change should Mr. Hale choose to demonstrate it consistently, over time, without an audience. The hearing was over. Outside the courthouse, the spring sun felt almost too bright after the fluorescent dimness inside. There were no reporters, no cameras, just ordinary people walking to their cars on an ordinary Tuesday, which was exactly the way I preferred it. Jake wrapped me in the biggest hug he'd given me since the day I came home from deployment. Told you, he said into my hair. You did. Nobody was taking that boy anywhere. Eli hugged both of us at once, and for a few uncomplicated minutes, everything felt wonderfully, ordinarily normal. Then I heard footsteps behind me and turned. Marcus stood several feet away, alone. Ashley waited near the courthouse entrance but didn't come any closer. He looked older, not from gray hair, but from something that had visibly shifted underneath the surface of him. I owe you an apology, he said. I waited. I should have been there. I was selfish. I convinced myself leaving was easier, and I kept telling myself I'd have time to fix it later. His voice cracked slightly. 9 years disappeared while I was telling myself that. There wasn't much left to say. No speech could return Eli's first steps, his first baseball game, his first day of school, his nightmares, his birthdays. Those moments belong to the past now, permanently. I can't change what I did, Marcus said quietly, but I'd like the chance to become a better father if Eli will let me. I looked toward my son. This wasn't my decision to make anymore. He was old enough to have a voice, and the judge had already made clear that his voice mattered more than either of ours. I knelt beside him. You heard everything today. What do you think? He thought about it for longer than most adults would have. Then he looked at his father directly. You hurt my mom. Marcus closed his eyes. I know. You hurt me too. I know that too. Another long silence stretched between them. Then Eli said something I don't think I'll ever forget for the rest of my life. I don't forgive people because they deserve it, he said. My mom taught me that forgiveness is something you choose to do, not something people earn. Marcus began to cry, real tears, the kind that come when a person finally stops lying to themselves about who they've been. I'd like to get to know you, Eli continued, quieter now. But slowly, Marcus nodded immediately. As slowly as you need. That was the beginning. Not of a perfect family. Those only exist in movies. But of an honest one. Over the following year, Marcus showed up, not perfectly, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes uncertain of what to say during their supervised counseling sessions. The first 3 times, Eli declined to see him at all, and Marcus, to his credit, didn't push. He simply sat in a coffee shop near the counselor's office each scheduled week in case Eli changed his mind, and drove home alone when he didn't. Trust rebuilds far more slowly than it breaks. The 4th time Marcus showed up at the counselor's office, Eli agreed to sit in the same room with him for 20 minutes, mostly in silence, while the counselor asked gentle, careful questions neither of them fully knew how to answer. Marcus told me about it afterward in the parking lot, his voice unsteady in a way I genuinely never heard from him before. He asked me what my favorite subject was in school, Marcus said. I told him. Then I asked him his and he told me, and for about 30 seconds it was just 2 people talking. That's it. That's all it was. And I don't think I'd felt that good about anything in years. I didn't say much back. I didn't need to. Ashley, I heard eventually through the same grapevine that had once told me about her, grew tired of a version of Marcus that no longer had the easy confidence she'd married. She left within the year, moving out of the lake house they'd bought together, and Marcus downsized to a modest apartment closer to the counselor's office, closer to us, without ever making a show of the sacrifice. I felt no satisfaction in any of it, only a distant, tired confirmation of something I'd already understood for a long time, that the parts of him that had failed us were never really about us at all. Little by little, over many careful months, father and son found something resembling common ground. Marcus began volunteering, awkwardly at first, with a local nonprofit that supported wounded veterans, the same population he had once tried to use against me in a courtroom. One evening, months later, he admitted something to me quietly while waiting to pick Eli up. When the judge read your record out loud, he said, I realized I'd spent years telling myself you were the broken one. He gave a small, sad, humorless laugh. Turns out I was the one who ran. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Life had already answered for both of us. Ryan stayed quietly, the way he always had. He never rushed anything. Never once acted like Marcus's slow re-entry into our lives was a threat to his own patient place in it. He kept showing up on Tuesdays and then on other days too. And eventually Eli started asking if Ryan could come to his baseball games, and Ryan always came and always stayed for the whole game, even the boring innings. One evening, almost a year after the trial, Eli was doing homework at the kitchen table while Ryan fixed a wobbly hinge on our back door, the way Jake used to before Jake got busy with his own growing family. Mom, Eli said, not looking up from his math worksheet. Yeah, bud? Is it okay if I start calling Ryan something other than just Ryan? I looked over at Ryan, who had gone very still with a screwdriver in his hand, clearly trying not to react. That's up to you and him, I said carefully. But I think that would make him really happy. Ryan looked up at me then, and I saw something in his face I hadn't let myself look at directly in a long time. Not a rescue. Not a fairy tale ending. Just a quiet, steady kind of certainty that had been standing patiently in my life for years, waiting for me to be ready to see it. No, ready, he said later, once Eli had gone up to finish his homework and it was just the 2 of us in the kitchen. The hinge finally fixed. The door swinging silent on its frame for the first time in months. Whatever he decides to call me, whenever he decides it, I'm not going anywhere either way. I know, I said. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I said it without bracing myself for it to turn out untrue. You know, he added, for the record, I was fully prepared to keep fixing that hinge every 6 months for the rest of my natural life and never say a word about any of this. I noticed the hinge squeaking suspiciously often, Ryan. A man has to have some strategy, he said, and this time we both laughed, easily, the kind of laughing that doesn't need an explanation attached to it. My parents flew in from Arizona the week after the trial, the first time they'd made the trip in 3 years. My father, who had read Eli bedtime stories over a phone screen for the better part of a decade, sat on our back porch with him for hours, mostly not talking, just tossing a baseball back and forth in the way men in my family have always preferred to say the things they can't quite say out loud. You did good, Gracie, my mother told me quietly in the kitchen, drying a dish that was already dry. I know it didn't feel like it most days, but you did good. I didn't feel like I had a choice, Mom. That's usually how the good ones feel, she said, and set the dish down and hugged me the way she used to when I was small enough to still fit entirely inside her arms. Today, Eli is preparing for college applications. He still wants to serve others in some capacity, whether in uniform or another profession entirely. That decision belongs to him now, not to me, and not to the man who once tried to claim credit for raising him. I'm simply proud of who he grew into, not because his life was easy, because hardship never hardened his heart the way it could have. The way it hardens so many. Some nights folding laundry or sitting on the porch with a cup of tea gone cold, I still think about that hospital room 9 years ago, the manila envelope on the blanket, the particular silence of a man who had already decided I wasn't worth the difficulty of staying. I used to think about it with anger. Then, for a long stretch of years, with a tired kind of grief I never quite let myself name out loud. Now, mostly, I think about it the way you think about weather from a long time ago. It happened. It shaped the ground underneath everything that came after, but it isn't the forecast anymore. Eli asked me once, not long after the trial, whether I regretted going on that final deployment. Whether, if I could go back, I'd use the waiver Marcus had begged me to use. I thought about it honestly before I answered him, because he deserved honesty more than he deserved comfort. No, I told him. I'd go again, not because I don't love you more than anything in this world, because I do. And I want you to grow up knowing your mother was the kind of person who showed up for people, even when it cost her everything. I want that to be the story you tell about me someday. Not the other one. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he hugged me, the way he used to when he was small enough to fit entirely against my chest, and said, "That's already the story I tell, Mom." Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't have understood 9 years ago. Sitting in a hospital bed with divorce papers on my blanket and a baby down the hall who needed me more than I believed I had the strength to give. The greatest victory was never winning that courtroom. It wasn't proving Marcus wrong, and it wasn't hearing that sentence from my military record read into the official transcript, as vindicating as that moment was. The greatest victory was raising a son who learned from watching me get up every single hard morning for 9 straight years that real strength isn't measured in rank, or medals, or revenge. It's measured in who shows up, again and again, especially on the days no one is watching and no one is keeping score. If this story reached something in you, I hope you'll carry one thing with you when it's over. The people who stay through life's hardest, most unglamorous battles are the ones who shape us most, far more than the ones who simply walk away and expect applause for eventually coming back. And if you've ever witnessed that kind of quiet, unglamorous courage in yourself or in someone you love, thank you for staying here with me long enough to hear it.